So we have John Hibbert with Shardless Bug versus Alistair Rees playing Infect.
We've managed to move one of our other games over. After that match finished relatively quickly, so we've got a game 3 from this match. It looks like Alistair Rees with Infect is on the play. We're opening with a cracked fetch into Tropical Island.
So I'm a big fan of the Infect list. I really like how it plays around in the format. I like how fast it can be. And Shardless Bug can sometimes be a bit clunky, a bit slow on being able to stop it. Although after sideboarding, it probably has such answers like Toxic Deluge to add to its already abrupt decay suite of removal.
So the Infect deck does one of the things which is a hallmark characteristic of this format, which is it plays a lot of spells without paying for them. It pays for them in other ways. It gives away life, it exiles cards from its graveyard, it exiles cards from its hand, and so on. But what it's doing is it's generating a fast kill without expending a lot of mana to do it. That means that you don't have to wait until those lands are on the table because you don't need to tap them. So this deck can kill you quite easily on turn 2 or 3 if it draws the right mix of cards. It also means that your opponent is forced to interact as early as possible. Disfigure from John Hibbert is exactly the kind of card that you want against this deck.
And then it depends on Alice's side whether he wants to use a pump spell to save the Glistener off if he has one in hand.
It's worth noticing that John just played the Disfigure immediately rather than passing the turn. As we mentioned earlier, it's generally considered good form to delay your actions as much as possible. It increases your window to make different decisions or reanalyze lines of play. Against Infect, if you attempt to use instant speed removal in your opponent's turn, if that removal interacts with the creature's toughness, so whether that's damage or toughness reduction, your opponent is possibly planning to play a combat buff that turn anyway, so giving them the opportunity to use the combat buff not only to deal the additional damage but to effectively counter your removal is a huge blowout. You can reverse that scenario by casting the removal in your own turn. Now if they want to use a combat buff to stop the removal from working, they still have that option. For instance, if Alistair had played an Invigorate in that scenario, that means that John then takes 4 less damage at a later stage.
I like that play from John Hibbert. So he took the 1 damage from the Inkmoth Nexus, and then after the end of that combat step, he then cast Golgari Charm to kill the Inkmoth Nexus.
So similarly, John's saying, I accept that you might have a pump that stops my plan from working, but I'm going to execute that plan at such a time that the pump doesn't deal extra combat damage, it only saves your creature.
I've seen in John Hibbert's hand there's a couple of brainstorms there. There's this Thoughtseize as well, and a Creeping Tar Pit and a Forest. So Alistair's showing John his hand. He has no creatures there. That seems like a pretty bad position for Infect to be in. Infect needs one of its 12 creatures to be able to really start dealing the damage that would win it the game. So there's no Glistener Elf, there's no Blighted Agent, and there's no Inkmoth Nexus there.
I find it very interesting that the card that got taken was Crows and Grip rather than Becoming Immense. So John's option there is essentially to take the Crows and Grip in order to protect one of his own permanents, or to take the Become Immense to shut Alistair Rees out of one of his ways of winning. And he's taken the Crows and Grip. So it's a Brainstorm followed most likely by Cracked Fetch. Yep, there we go. Yep. So that's improving John's hand from a position where he's already quite a way ahead. At this point, it's all but sewn up, really. These decks do have 2 principal characteristics where they're at the opposite end of the spectrum from each other, and that is how the resources are used and deployed. Alistair's cards essentially all stick together into one giant hammer to beat the opponent over the head with. You know, you play a creature and then you put some pumps onto it. That means that if it gets blown out at the wrong time, you get 3 for 1 or 4 for 1. A lot of John's cards work the opposite way. We're going wide, we're generating card advantage. Individually, none of them are very strong, but they all add up into this engine that's going to win the game. I mean, Ancestral Visions, the idea that you're going to play a card on turn 3 that doesn't do anything until turn 7 sounds inherently quite odd for Legacy, but this deck makes that work.
I see an Abrupt Decay hang out in John Hibbert's cards. Hand. Sometimes that's not so great against Infect because they have Vines of Vastwood, which can protect the creature from the abrupt decay by countering it on resolution instead of countering it in other ways.
Yep. I mean, people assume that card's there primarily for the pump, and that's not entirely untrue, but the hexproof mode is very relevant.
Seems like Alistair did manage to draw a creature, but it's not one with Infect. It's just a Noble Hierarch.
One of the odd things that does occasionally become relevant with the Infect deck is the ability to kill with regular combat damage. Noble Hierarch's incredibly strong in the deck, and so is Spellskite. And with cards like Berserk and Become Immense, and the fact that the opponent when faced with Infect will often be a little bit careless with their life total because they assume it just isn't relevant. So we'll crack fetches, we'll play Thought Seizers, we'll pay life for Force of Will. They'll put themselves down to 13 or 12, and then just get blown out by Noble Hierarch, attack, Become Immense, Berserk.
Seems like Alistair's managed to find one of his Infectors, and luckily for him, it is the land version one. So John's Abrupt Decay is looking a little bit worse.
Yep, not only does Abrupt Decay not stop that, but it flies, which means we can't block it with Tesseract Shaman either. There's a Tarmogoyf in his hand.
Another Brainstorm.
Either.
John Hibbert probably waiting for that Ancestral Vision to come off suspend next turn.
Yeah. He does need to survive that extra turn though, and I'm interested to see how we're planning to do that. I'm not sure what else we've got in Alistair's hand, but the +6 from Become Immense could well be enough to seal the deal.
Yeah, 6 + 1 from the Noble Hierarch +1 for its power already is 8. I think Alistair's only got one card in hand.
Oh, that will be the Become
Immense.
Immense. So that means a pump off the deck, an Invigorate, a Berserker, even another Noble Hierarch ought to be enough. I guess John can kill the Noble Hierarch before combat, and that effectively reduces the attack by 1. But there's not much else going on there. In his position, rather than play Tarmogoyf, I think I would have cast the Brainstorm and hoped to find a Wasteland. Again, I'm left questioning the decision to take the Crows and Grip. Perhaps he's brought in Pithy Needle and can name Inkmoth Nexus.
So we'll see what Alistair wants to do here. Might be an attack for lethal, might not be. Seems like he's drawn a land. So it won't be an attack for lethal. So it's an animated Inkmoth Nexus. He's going to combat. There's just so many pump spells that Alistair could have drawn there. There's the 4 Invigorate in the list and the Vine Spells. We don't know specifically what the boarding's been like, but I can't see that changing much.
I think that's actually 2 Abrupt Decays in John hand.
Only 2 from Alistair, putting John on 3 poison. Oh, he did the drain mode, and here comes Ancestral Visions off suspend.
So Alistair didn't play his pump, he just dealt 2 with Inkmoth Nexus. That's +1 from the Exalter trigger. The extra cards for John here might be enough to put the game away, but it's still a fairly precarious position to be in. Alistair's got the Inkmoth Nexus. Oh, there's the Thought Seize that's going to take the Become Immense.
I think Alistair might be cracking lands to Finn. I don't know what Alistair is searching for.
I think this is just deck thinning.
It's an effect with fetch lands, not particularly that great.
No.
Maybe thinks he's running out of time on this game.
Ah, okay. Hardcast
Oh, we thought he only had 1 card in hand.
No, he had 1 left when he untapped for his last turn, which was the Become Immense, but he also drew another card for his turn. So So now we're still representing lethal with that Become Immense in hand.
And that's another brainstorm from John. He's probably trying to look for some kind of removal spell, either, well, hopefully Wasteland.
Wasteland or Busts, I would imagine. Well, he's found a force which will stop the Become Immense.
He's still got the slow burn plan on Infect though with the Inkmoth Nexus. So the slow burn plan for Infect is to just deal two at a time here, and hopefully get there.
Yeah, the way a lot of the buffs interact with your opponent's spells mean that there's this real bizarre element of who blinks first. You know, if the opponent tries to cast their removal before you cast the buff, then the buff actually counts as a removal. If you cast your removal first, then if you cast the buff first, then the removal is a huge blowout, so you don't do that. So you just keep attacking for 2. And before you know it, your opponent's let 3 or 4 turns slip by without casting a spell.
That seems like it might be quite big there. Brainstorm actually functions quite interestingly in Infect from my perspective, is it can really change your game plan. You can go from the slow burn to the get you game plan very, very quickly by just looking at the top 3 cards and putting 2 back.
I think we saw Berserk there.
Seems like he's keeping a Ponder.
A Ponder as well. Yeah, with no fetch land, you want a way to get rid of the less relevant cards.
He's going to go Ponder.
We'll have a look at that 3rd card anyway, but it's probably a shuffle.
Cantrip into cantrip and finding not very much. It's a shuffle. I anticipate that he's searching for another pump spell. He's animated the Inkmoth.
I think with that level of enthusiasm, he's probably found what he was looking for.
Going to become immense Inkmoth. Just picking some cards to delve away. So this will make it into a 7/7, 8/8 with the Noble Higher-Up pump, if it resolves.
I'm wondering what he may have found. Flusterstorm is probably the strongest solution. I was about to say Spell Pierce, but I've fallen into the trap that so many other people do, which is forget that Deathrite will make mana, so he can actually just pay 2.
That's the Force of Will from John.
Yeah.
Be interesting to see what else he does here.
We're fairly sure he's got something. But even if he has, I mean, that isn't an answer to the Inkmoth. He's still going to 5 Infect. Alistair still gets to attack for another 2 the following turn. Although actually he's probably get dead to the Tarmogoyf, so that's irrelevant.
Alistair goes down to 5, I think. And he's going to lose his blocker as well. Oh no, sorry, it was just the Abrupt Decay.
Yeah. That is enough to seal the deal with
Cripping Tar Pit for the win.
Cripping Tar Pit there.
It'd be interesting to find out why the discard of the Crows and Grip over the Become Immense.
It was suggested it was actually Berserk. No, it was Crows and Grip. There we go. Yeah.
Because
the bold green on the Crows and Grip and the From the Vault Berserk are very similar, so there was a question about whether we missed it, but it was Crows and Grip there.
That game seemed to be all about the Become Immense and nothing to do with the Crows and Grip.
No, I think I think he'd taken. Had he taken Become Immense instead of Crows and Grip, I think that game was over several turns ago.
Yeah, me too. So John Hibbert has both Pithy Needle and Knight of Soul's Betrayal, which is probably the reason for the Crows and Grips. Because Knight of Soul's Betrayal means that that Alistair's creatures...
That card's essentially unbeatable.
Alistair's creatures will all die when they enter the battlefield because they all have 1 toughness. Apart from... Actually, Viridian Corruptor has 1 toughness as well. Yeah, they all just die when they enter the battlefield. So it seems like John took out some of the slower cards two Jason, two Ancestral.
Those cards are fantastic, but in this matchup, you just don't really have time to take advantage of them. You've either been killed or survived long before those cards become relevant.
And obviously he decided to switch out the Hymns to Thorax for Thoughtseize to be able to have some speed on the discard. Hymns to Thorax is quite good, but if you're already dead, by the time you'd be able to cast it, there's just no point.
Got the meta breakdown. So Infect is one of the few decks that's in the room in multiples today. We've got a couple of players on that.
No, I'm alright. You don't have to say very much.
And John is the only player on Shardless Bug. So that's round 4 coming to a close. We got to see a couple of different decks there, thanks to our first feature match finishing relatively quickly. Infect is a deck that's been relatively popular at a lot of tournaments recently.
It was popularised by Tom Ross, one of the SEG players. It's a very, very fast deck. It's a very different, in my mind, it's a different animal to the modern variant, which seems to be a lot more all-in. With the Legacy variant, you've got the access to Force of Will and Daze and Brainstorm, which makes it more blue than the modern version.
It's a good example of how some decks that in theory exist in both modern Legacy are ports of each other and some really, really aren't. And I don't think the two have very much in common at all. So the difference that Brainstorm and Berserk and all the crazy free pumps make is absolutely insane. It does occupy this odd middle ground between aggro and combo. It means that people don't necessarily know how to attack it because they don't necessarily anticipate which angle they're being attacked on, so how do you react to it?
As I said earlier, it has these two different modes, the slow burn, I'll hit you for 2, I'll hit you for 2, and then before you know it, in comes a pump spell and you're dead.
And the opponent's deck there, Shardless Bug, being more or less the polar opposite. You know, it's really not trying to kill you quickly at all. What it wants to do is run a long game that involves interaction, disruption, card advantage, and large threats.
It just doesn't seem like Bug had that Shardless has that much it can do against it, but as we saw there are tools that it had that enabled it to win the game.
Yeah, I mean, the pinpoint discard of Thoughtseize over him to Torek being random is a fairly big deal. You get to play the turn earlier, but you also get to take the card that's going to kill you, leaving with a couple of lands that perhaps not relevant. The uncounterable removal suite is quite relevant because the deck does play Daze Force. You've also got additional advantage in the form of the Liliana Edict. That's pairings for the next round just going up, so we'll find out very shortly who our next feature match is.
You gave me planning for round 4, but
Let's just find who we've got. John Ingham and Daniil Starr, who are both on maximum points. I'm expecting that to be an ID though, so I wouldn't choose that table. Yeah, we're just going to run to adverts for a couple of seconds while the players get seated and we figure out who's our next match for you. So thanks for watching, and we'll be back in a moment.